me hit record, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So, welcome everybody. My name is Lucas Rodriguez. I am the Senior Learning and Assessment Specialist for the Central Region in Canada. With me today, I have my team, as well as a few other colleagues. We're very excited to have you here. I'll go through quick introductions on our side, talk about an agenda, what we're looking to accomplish in today's presentation, because we have some really exciting information that we want to cover. And then we'll dive into the live demo on how the Unified Classroom and PowerSchool SIS together can support your standards. So again, my name is Lucas. I'm located in Sacramento, California, but I do support the Canada and the Central Region. With me today, I have Kelly Adey, who will be presenting shortly, and then followed by Zach Davidson, who will then follow up with Kelly. Zach is our solution engineer. He will be the one demoing the product live. With me and my counterparts that support the rest of the country and internationally, because PowerSchool is in about 55 countries, I think right now, give or take, Ryan, right? I have Kat Brager. Kat's another senior rep. She supports the East Coast and Northeast region. Tasha Cardona is on the West Coast, and Alaska and the West Coast states. And then Ryan Allen supports Southeast and then international. So China, South America, Europe, pretty much the whole world. Call Mr. International. So on the next one, today's agenda, again, quickly, we're going to talk about how standards-based grading can be supported in PowerSchool, how to start that. So where does a standard get born? How do I create that standard in the PowerSchool SIS? All right, and then once it's in SIS within the Power Teacher Pro Gradebook, now in Schoology, how do I deliver that standard? How do I make sure that it's assigned to a student? How do I get that in the classroom, engage with the students, make that standard a real thing? And then from there, how performance matters then allows you to report and report on that standard, get actual data that you can deliver in real time, make corrections on, and really the full circle of what the Unified Classroom has to offer. So Kelly's going to kick us off with the high level view of standards-based grading and what PowerSchool do to combine for that support. And then I'll pass it over to Zach. Zach's going to dive right in. So I'm going to kick it over to Kelly and we'll jump in.
That's good. Hi, everyone. Before we get started talking about really where to get started with standards-based approaches, I kind of wanted to just bring up kind of a foundational idea around why that shift is really an important one. So what we have on the screen right here, first of all, is we have traditional grading contrasted with standards-based systems. And in the middle, you see things that are in common. So a lot of approaches can use letters or numbers or phrases, regardless of what system it's in. It's used to convey student progress on a particular scale, can be used for elementary or secondary, and is definitely more scalable when you're using technology. I think everyone knows that. And then also uses multiple pieces of evidence to basically form whatever that final assessment of student learning is. Now, if you click again, Lucas, we should see now, how do these things though differ? So on the traditional grading system, you tend to grade on things like tasks. So you give grades on quizzes, on homework, on projects. Typically your end of term grade or your cumulative grade is basically a percentage system. And so it's based on a cumulative percentage of scores that the students are receiving. Often you see extra credit or zeros even being given if work isn't submitted. And typically all items get graded. And then we have that overall grade that ends up at the end of a grading term. And they get 1 grade per course. So at the end of the course, you get a grade. Now let's contrast that with what we might do with standards. So with the standards-based system, it's different in that instead of grading on particular item types and assigning grades to tasks, we're actually looking at learning targets or learning goals or performance standards, and we're actually grading on those. Then we have to think about, what does proficiency look like for those standards? A lot of districts and schools use a 1 to 4 scale, but that certainly isn't something that's set in stone. It can be whatever you want it to be. We mentioned international schools. If you're using IB or MYP, they have a different set of scales that they use to identify progress against those standards. And really, you're trying to get your best evidence. So you don't want to grade everything against a standard unless you think as a teacher, it's a really good piece of evidence that will demonstrate student learning. So unlike traditional, where you may grade everything, you should be selective when thinking about standards-based grading and standards-based approaches. And so we really only want to measure those things that really show value. The grade, so to speak, is often based on your most recent evidence. Because if you average something over the course of a semester or a course of a grading term, a student likely isn't going to be proficient at that standard at the beginning. It's because they're learning. So we don't want to have that impact their end of term grade. So we want to think about what's the most recent evidence that I really feel like shows me where the student is on that proficiency scale. And then finally, if you're using standards-based systems, you don't just get one grade per course. You get multiple grades based on the different standards that you are talking about for the course. All right, so Lucas, shift for me. Lucas is my driver today. So I want to look at the standards of the student-centered learning cycle with the lens of standards, because this really is how you get started. So you start with planning. You engage students in work that actually is aligned to standards. You then monitor their progress against standards, and then you make adjustments. So let's dive into just a little bit about what these different phases are, because if you're in a place where you are just starting to think about how to approach this, this might be a really good map for you to think about. So in the plan stage, the first question is, what do we want students to know, understand, and do? So before you even start deciding on activities or tasks or assessments, you really have to identify those priority standards, figure out what you want to measure so that you can really figure out how students are doing against those. So what are we actually measuring or tracking? How are we actually building that into our curriculum plans? And what data do we have about where students are starting? Now, as we think about then shifting into actually getting evidence of student learning, that's the engage part of it. And you'll be seeing all this in the platforms today, but this is where we give students tasks or things to do where we want to make sure that what they're doing is aligned with our curriculum standards. We engage them in those activities so that we can then assess their progress along the way. As we move into monitor then, as we're gathering that body of evidence, we have to have a way to figure out, how do we know students are learning? What data can we leverage? How do we best communicate that progress, not just for ourselves, but to students and parents as well? And then how do we ensure that our coworkers, our other staff members that are also involved in supporting student learning, how do they get the data to make those decisions as well? And then finally, once we get all that great information after monitoring, now what? How do we adjust to student needs to personalize and customize learning? So what are our next steps? What further instructional resources are needed? Or where do we need to maybe provide some extension activities for those students that have gone to that proficiency or above level in a standard? So if you want to get started and you're not quite sure where, start with plan. Identify your key standards first. Those need to be in place before we get to what the power of PowerSchool can do when looking at thinking about standards-based approaches. All right, so as we think about what is a priority standard, it's basically a really carefully selected subset of grade-specific or course-specific standards within a content area, and that's that question of what do we want students to know, understand, and do. Now, when you think about standards, if you look at, let's say, what we have at state standard levels, there's often too many to cover in a given year, in a given term. So it's really good to think about which ones are really the big ones you want to hit, and prioritize those when you're in that planning stage, because that's going to impact the work that you do and the way that you measure it. Now, the next thing to think about before we even get into engaging students is not just what are the standards that we're measuring, but the next phase is, what are we going to grade them against? And by that, we're talking about a proficiency scale. So Lucas, if you could go to the next slide for me. So proficiency scales basically identify what do those different levels of progress look like for a student. Now, this is a sample that comes from Marzano on how you might think about what those numbers represent. I think one thing to think about, though, is that numbers can be really deceptive, especially to parents. So it's really important that you communicate what these scales mean. And some districts even replace those letters with a word so that it seems a little less tied to a numerical score. So maybe it exceeds and proficient. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have really identified what does it mean to be meeting that standard, what's your target, and then where does a student fall based on that scale. Now, once you have those two things in place, then we can think about how we can engage students in that learning. So Lucas, you just go to the next slide for me. So we think about now, what's the instructional part of it look like? So we have systems where you can connect all kinds of tools that can support both synchronous and asynchronous learning. But the important thing is, regardless of which modality you're using, gather the evidence you need. So you need to be able to tie what students are doing to those identified standards and scales so you can track their progress along the way. Now, after we have students engaging in that whole child instruction, our next slide talks about then how do we then progress monitor. So how do we have a system that lets us know where students are? And one of the great things about PowerSchool is that it provides multiple ways to figure out where students are against those standards, and really is trying to push the needle on unifying how we understand student progress based on standards. And then finally, when we think about that, making adjustments, those real-time adjustments. So when you get that data, how do you then, in your learning management system, in your assessment practices, how do you make basically those pivots quickly so you can then push the student to the next level for those identified standards? All right, so now that we've got kind of a basic framework, I'm going to turn it back over to Lucas to really think about then how do we then see these things in our actual platform. So
Awesome.
Lucas, back to you.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it. So really quickly, before we dive into the live presentation of Zach showing what we can do this in real time, I have a few questions I'm going to ask. We have a poll, 3 questions. They're very quick. I'm launching it right now. So if you guys can take a second to get those answered, we'll do it about 2 minutes and then we'll jump right into the demo.
Lucas, I love getting this kind of information. We often give these polls when we're actually doing these webinars. It's always really fascinating for us to see, where people are. And often people are really on a gamut of either just starting or maybe they're deeply into a standards-based approach with their school or district already. So this is great info for us. So we really appreciate you taking just a minute or two to fill out that poll for us.
Yes, thank you very much, guys. And they're coming in, so I really appreciate that. We'll give it a little bit longer. I think I can leave the poll up a few more minutes, but I will kick it over to Zach. Zach, if you want to take it away.
Awesome, will do. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zach Davidson, as mentioned. I'm one of the solution engineers for PowerSchool. I've been on the Schoology side of the house for almost 9 years now. So it's been quite some time. Really excited to be on today's call. And really, we want to focus back in to exactly what Kelly was mentioning, right? That the wheel, if you will, right? Where we plan, engage, monitor, and adjust, and how we can actually do that through the various solutions under the PowerSchool umbrella. I actually did want to start with the end in mind. And so while we're here directly in the student information system, we'll go right into one of these classes here. And what you're going to note right at the onset as I come into the grading capability is that, of course, we can always manage both gradebooks from a traditional standpoint in PowerTeacher Pro, as well as the standards grades in itself. So for today, as we focus in on those standards, what you're going to notice is the proficiency scale that Kelly was mentioning. Right, I'm going to zoom in a bit here, and we can see that from the traditional grades that are being associated, there is the parent competency and then the substandards that fall in line, all within that 1 to 4 range. Right now, again, this can all be adjusted by you at the district level. But what's great here is that from the perspective of a teacher, not only are these grades coming in from an assignment level in Schoology or assessments, both in Schoology and Performance Matters, but right here within the platform, I can take a look here, as you can see, and very quickly identify each and every student. I can toggle from student to student very easily here. We also provide the ability to make observational grades. So if there is a change in anything that you have noticed as an individual teacher or educator where you want to make an adjustment, you can very easily do so. At the same time, if I click on this icon here, what you're going to notice is that I get a quick glimpse as to how we got to this grade, right? I can see here the different scales, or excuse me, learning objects that were associated directly to this standard. And if I kind of zoom in here, you'll notice course content that's coming in from Schoology, as well as possibly an assessment from Performance Matters as well. So not only can we see what the content was that was associated to this standard, but we can understand how that student obviously got to this grade here. Now, when it comes to how, excuse me, let me come into the settings here just to highlight the calculations. In this example, just to highlight in this piece here, there are multiple ways that we can come to that final grade, right? You can see here that there are multiple options, whether it's the most recent scores, as Kelly was referring to, where we may not want an average over the course of an entire semester, but more so here, the most recent grades. In that, you can see that we can adjust the number of items that count as the most recent, if you will, right? So in this example here, this is the last 3 items with each one having the same weight of 33.33%. Now, this can be edited either by the teacher if you associate those permissions at the district level, or you can manage and control this and lock it down basically at the central office location. But you can see here that I can change those weights if need be. I'm not going to make any changes. My colleagues would get very mad if I did, but that can be changed again at the teacher level or centrally located and locked at that district central office location. So we can create those settings and adjust them as need be. And then at the same time, we can see the progress of our students directly here in Power Teacher Pro as well. So in this example, what we're noticing once again are the parent competencies and the substandards that are aligned. And we can even dive in a little bit further and actually see where our students on an individual or across our classroom, where they're trending up or down in this example here for each one of those standards. Now, the question comes into play, well, how do we get here, right? What are we doing on a item by item basis to actually identify student measurement and their performance against these standards? Now, to that point, we're going to actually maneuver over into the Schoology learning management system, where the teaching and learning is actually happening on a day-to-day basis between teacher and student. Now, in this example, what you're going to notice here in the upper right-hand corner is this waffle icon, and we call this our app switcher. This is going to provide an opportunity for your faculty, your teachers to migrate or maneuver and transition from one PowerSchool solution to the other. With one click of a tab here, we provide that single sign-on approach that allows me to migrate from the Power Teacher Pro Gradebook directly into the place where the teaching and learning is happening on a day-to-day basis within the Schoology learning management system. Now, in this example, we want to talk a little bit more about that planning piece. For some of you, this may be your first time seeing Schoology. Many of you are actually using the platform. For those that are being introduced to the system, let's just kind of cover what we're looking at here. This is the Schoology LMS, and I'm currently logged in as a teacher. The cool thing is that for all your end users, students, teachers, even parents, the layout and design element is very similar for everyone, right? In a very uniformed way so that we're all using the system in the same exact approach. Now, the courses are exactly that. It's where the teaching and learning exists. But the cool thing here is, again, tying back to the integration with the student information system, the courses and the course enrollments come automatically from PowerSchool SIS. So teachers don't have to create their courses or register or enroll and unenroll students. That all happens on the back end through that integration automatically. Now, we think of ourselves as a district-wide solution. So to that point, we do have a groups area. You can think about the groups as anything from an extracurricular standpoint that's happening within your district. Student groups like sports teams or music clubs, faculty groups, right, where we can think about that planning piece. And this is really where I want to go. We have here Heather, who's a part of a PLC and the curriculum and instruction group. And this is a place where we can actively communicate with each other as faculty members, but also build and share resources. So when we're thinking about that planning piece, whether that's a curriculum specialist or a PLC working collaboratively, we can build everything here from an individual assignment to a full-on course directly within the platform and make this available for teachers to leverage in their own individual classrooms. Even in this example, you'll notice here that Heather has access to course templates that were created at different grade levels throughout the entire school, so that as an individual teacher, I can come into this course template that was created by either my colleague or myself and made available to the entire faculty. And now I can add it to my course and make it available. Now, what's great here is that I can pull the whole course, or I can pull individual items from within a unit or a folder and things of that sort. The items themselves that are built here can be aligned to standards as well. So we can all pull that directly into our individual course as noted here with this Add to Course tab. Now, additionally, when thinking about the planning piece from that individual teacher perspective, I can build out my content directly within the course as well. So when it comes to our courses, Schoology has a 3-column layout that showcases teacher tools to the left, a reminders and upcoming feed so that teachers and students know for that given week what's coming up, whether it's a test or quiz that I need to study for, a homework assignment that I need to start working on, things like that. And it's here in the center column where the teachers themselves can, again, get creative to engage their students where they are. The content we build and author for second graders is going to be much different than the content that we build and author for an 11th grader or a 12th grader. And so you get to be very creative in how you build and deploy your content, but we're going to focus in on a couple of different ways that we author content and still align that content back to standards. Whether I'm building an assignment or a simple course assessment in our platform, a discussion, any and everything can be tied back to the standards. So in this example here, when I create a homework assignment, a couple of things that I just want to quickly note here. One is that I have this rich text editing that's made available to once again engage my students where they are. If I want to incorporate more visuals for my younger learners, I can very easily do so, or pull in any sort of YouTube video that I want them to see before working on their assignment. I can very easily do that. Additionally, we can add and what we call package our content with uploaded files perhaps, or if I want to maintain that level of intimacy between myself and my students as a teacher, we can still incorporate this audio video capability as well. Very simple and easy to use, as you can see here. Additionally, I do want to take a quick pause and make note that for districts that are leveraging productivity tools like Microsoft or Google, we do provide an integration capability directly here within the platform to both systems. That will, one, allow you, and I'm going to showcase this from the Google side, but make note that this will always be available as well for Microsoft users leveraging OneDrive. But in this example, I can pull my Google documents or my Microsoft OneDrive documents without having to leave the system here, thinking again of that one-stop shop integration capability that Schoology provides. And in this example here, let's say I take this Google document or that Microsoft OneDrive document and attach it to the homework assignment. It actually creates a copy for each one of my students right here within the system. Now, additionally, this is a point that I'd love to make note to, is that as I assign a category to this assignment or to the assessment or the discussion in Schoology, what you're going to notice here is this Sync to SIS tab. That's always going to be checked off. So we can always create this homework assignment. And once I do so, it automatically creates that grade column with the associated weights and categories, not only in Schoology, but also in the PowerTeacher Pro Gradebook. Okay, so that grade passback, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, happens not only at the traditional grade level, but also from a standards-based approach. To that point, right here within the assignment that I'm building out, I have the ability to align that content to standards. So as Kelly was mentioning previously, the ability to pull in those standards directly from the SIS and make them available directly here in Schoology is available to your teachers so that we can align an assignment, a question on a test or quiz, or a discussion back to those standards. Now, in this example, just to highlight here that Google integration or that Microsoft integration on the back end, what that looks like once students have actually seen this assignment, they're working on this assignment. In this example here, I've got a description of what I want my students to do aligned, and I've attached that Google document. Here's the rubric that I've created so my students can see and understand how they're going to be graded. Now, from the teacher perspective, I can come in here and toggle from student to student as seen here. And if I'm a secondary teacher, even section to section, all in line, leveraging my Google annotation tools, or once again, Microsoft annotation tools if you're using Microsoft. And I can still annotate here and suggest and edit and strike through and things like that. But for the students that have actually submitted the work, I still have the Google annotation tools, but once again, I can open the gradebook up here, or open up this rubric and immediately grade this item, right? And when I go ahead and save that grade, this grade is going to now flow directly into the Schoology gradebook. And we're actually going to showcase from that standpoint how that grade can flow back over into PowerTeacher Pro as well. Okay, so we can do that from the assignment capability here, but we can also build out course assessments in Schoology. So if a teacher has a simple check for understanding at the end of class or anything of that sort, they can very easily create those assessments right here within the platform. And again, align that content to standards. Now, once I've done so, I do want to showcase the gradebook here in Schoology, because the thought here is that we build our content in the place where the teaching and learning is happening. We also grade it here. And yes, it does flow into this Schoology gradebook, but I can make changes to these grades directly from the gradebook in itself, right? So any student, if I need to make any sort of adjustments to that grade, in this example here, the rubric grade, I can very easily do so. And once again, when these grades are tied back to standards, not only is that numeric grade being tied back to the grade book, but the standards grade as well. And now when I make those changes, I don't have to go back into PowerTeacher Pro to make those adjustments. I simply sync those changes back over into PowerSchool, just with a click of a tab there. So that's the real benefit here that we provide within the platform is, again, I'm grading in the system where the students are actually submitting the work, but I can sync those grades back over into PowerTeacher Pro. Now, additionally, what we have here is the ability for you to see and understand when those grades have been assigned back to the system, right? When it was the last successful sync has happened. And for those that have opted out, right, what you're going to notice is, once again, when we think about building out assignments and assessments and discussions, think about particularly formative assessments, right? Where I may or may not want that grade syncing back over into the student information system. So if I do have a formative check for understanding where I do want the score, but I don't want that actually being tied back to the gradebook of record, I can manage that by just simply unchecking that sync to SIS tab right there. Okay, and that will opt me out of pushing that grade back over into the student information system. So we talked about building assignments here, and there's also the ability to build assessments, right? Now, of course, we can build assessments in Schoology, but I also want to highlight the thought process of building assessments in Performance Matters and what that looks like with the integration capabilities. So in this example here, what I'm going to do now is actually come right back into that waffle icon that we talked about. This is always going to be present in every PowerSchool application. So in this example here, I'm going to tie in and go directly into Performance Matters. And we're going to talk a little bit now about building out content, or excuse me, our assessments, what that looks like from a building standpoint, and then how we can understand student achievement, either at an individual level or on the assessment as a whole. And then not only monitor that progress, but make adjustments as well. What that looks like from a building standpoint, deployment, and then measuring those scores. So when it comes to building out an assessment, very quickly, I'll just kind of touch on this here. We can build out items and search by the standard in itself. So in this example here, I'm going to search for the word parallel, and I'm using a standard search. So what's happening now is, as it's loading up here, it's actually going to pull all of my all of the standards that contain that keyword of parallel directly here. Now, my demo site is tied back to the Common Core, but obviously for you, we can tie this back to your state standards and things like that. So in this example, just very quickly, I can pull particular questions. I can dive into the bank. I can questions that are aligned to these standards. But in this example, just to save time, I'm just going to pull 3 random questions from that standard and 4 from this standard, and add them to my assessment. Now, what's cool here is that as we build out the assessment, what happens is I have the ability to get a basic blueprint that shows dynamically. The first thing that it shows actually is the number or the standards that are aligned to this assessment and the number of items that have been associated to each standard. So if there are opportunities where we build out an assessment and we need to understand or we have a blueprint, if you will, of what standards that we need to address and how many questions to each standard. As we build out that assessment in Performance Matters, we get that dynamic report to showcase that standard and the number of items associated there. Now, additionally, as I build this assessment out and think about deployment, I can come in here and choose a particular course type and a grade level. this is going to be associated back into Schoology for teachers in this example that are math grade 7 level teachers. So as I build this assessment out, now it's going to be available to all those middle school math teachers in the grade 7 level. And when I come back here into Schoology, what I'll do now, give me 1 second to actually tie in Heather Harris here. When we come back into Heather's course, this algebra course, what you're going to notice here is that, yes, I've got my homework assignments that I've built in Schoology and my discussions and maybe even a course assessment that was built in the platform. But when I click on add materials, what you're going to also notice is that we can add common assessments, any sort of benchmark or interim assessment that's been built in Performance Matters. Okay, and so in this example here, I'm going to pull that assessment, let's say the Algebra CFA, and add it to my course in Schoology. It appears right at the bottom of the course here, unpublished to my students. I can maneuver this into any one of the unit folders so that it becomes a part of the learning experience for my students. And then in this example, I'm just going to publish this, but we can also create a scheduling, if you will, of that assessment to be pushed out. But now what I'm going to do now is actually maneuver over into Jared Daniels. Jared is a student in Heather's algebra classroom. And in this example, once again, I get to go through my assignments and my discussions in the platform, but I also see here my Algebra CFA, that assessment that was created in Performance Matters. But what you notice is that for Jared, I don't leave the system to access that assessment. I can take that assessment right here within the platform. So we provide that single sign-on capability, not only to the teachers and the faculty, but to students as well. When we think again about that level of engagement when it comes to the student perspective, right, we're staying in one location. We don't have multiple windows and tabs that we need to maneuver through and think about various login credentials. When you're in PowerSchool, you're in all the PowerSchool solutions. And so in this example here, Jared can walk through and take this assessment one by one. We're not going to go through each and every item here, but you get the gist. This is an opportunity to stay centralized in that one location for the teacher and the student alike. And then, of course, Jared doesn't lose any Performance Matters functionality. All of the accommodations that were provided to him within the authoring of that assessment come over as well. Text-to-speech functionality, calculators, highlighters, things of that sort, all are coming directly here for that individual student. Now I'm going to come back into Performance Matters here and talk a little bit about what that teacher would see, once students have actually completed the assessment. In this example here, we're going to start off at the individual student level, right? So I'm going to type in one of my students here, Duncan Delgado, and I'm going to pull his student detail report up. Now, what's great here is this initial report of the student details. All of this content is actually coming directly in from the PowerSchool student information system, right? The schedule, any sort of attendance records or early warning indicators or discipline reports, things like that. But I do want to highlight once again the standards that are also being associated here within Performance Matters assessments. As a teacher or as any stakeholder, I can come into this student detail report and get a quick glimpse as to where Duncan is performing against all of the standards that have been addressed in Performance Matters assessments. You'll notice here that I can also hyperlink into any one of these standards and very quickly get a glimpse now as to where the student is performing in comparison to the classroom, to the school, and the district as a whole. Okay, so again, when it comes to the opportunity of monitoring, we talked a lot about the planning piece and how we build content in Schoology and align it to the standards, how we create those standards and engage our students with assignments, with assessments in the platform, but also now from a monitoring standpoint, once students have actually taken these assessments, we can see how they're being, how they're performing against those standards. And then not only from the individual student basis, but once again, on the assessment as a whole. So when I think about, let's say in this example, I pull up an individual assessment, let's say this Math 7 algebra assessment here, right away, I get the standards that were aligned to this assessment. directly here within the platform. And I also get to see how my students across my class have performed once again in comparison to the school and the district as a whole here. Now, overall, my students performed pretty well, right? But I can see that for this individual standard, there was a little bit of an issue here, right? Where I've got almost 30, or actually 30 of my students that were not meeting expectations. Well, I can actually identify those students if need be here. When I click into the assessment as a whole, now what's happening is that instead of just seeing the standards and that bar graph, I actually get an item analysis report that showcases student performance on each one of the items within that individual assessment. I can click directly into this standard if need be, and it's going to highlight the questions that were associated to that standard. I can also click on the items in itself, and it's now going to showcase to me the 3 questions that were aligned to that individual standard. So in this example, there's a lot that we can do here, right? I can identify the student achievement here within the platform on an individual basis to see in this example that Nana didn't perform as well on this individual assessment, or excuse me, this particular item. I can see the question, her response, and the correct response here. But I can also do that across my class. So if I click on the individual question, I can see in comparison to the school and district that a majority of my students that didn't answer the answer correctly, they actually answered with letter A. I can highlight those students here, and then that'll pull up those 22 students right here. So those 22 students that were not meeting expectations against this particular standard are now listed out for me in the Performance Matters platform. Now, the beauty here is that once again, I can come right back into Schoology if need be, and anything from an individual assignment to an entire folder of work can be individually assigned back to those students. So once again, when we think about the monitoring piece, it's happening in Performance Matters. It's also happening in Schoology. So I can see right here from, again, where the content is being taken by my students, how they're actually performing against these standards as well, right here within the learning management system. So what you're noticing is these different points and places where we can monitor student achievement. In this example here, we can provide that hierarchical approach so that I can see, once again, individual students and where they're struggling, where their strengths and weaknesses are. And then once again, I can come back into the platform to assign content either at an individual basis or a group or a folder basis to showcase an entire folder of work and individually assign that out to my individual students as seen here. So what we've really gone through is the opportunity to think about planning, not only from the proficiency scales and what we're actually building in the platform from the student information system and how that's getting reported out, but also directly within the platform, the content that we build back to those standards. From an engagement standpoint, we're also directly here within Schoology as well, going through assignments, assessments, both from Schoology and Performance Matters, and how that we're engaging the student in one location in the Schoology LMS, but measuring and monitoring that performance both in Performance Matters and in Schoology, and then the ability obviously here to adjust any sort of content and push that content directly to those individual students of need, either on an individual basis as seen here, where I can push content to individual students based on those needs, or create groups of students and push content out to them as a whole as well. So I hope you found that beneficial. Obviously, I'm sure there are probably some questions that you might have. And I think I'll pass this back over to Lucas now to talk a little bit more about action items and next steps moving forward.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Greatly appreciate it. Really quickly, I do have one more poll to follow up on what we just went over. So I'm going to launch that right now and give everybody a minute or two to answer those questions if you guys don't mind. Just like to get some feedback on what you thought from the presentation that Zach had. And then Kelly and I are going to wrap this up, but we're also going to talk a little bit about what to expect and what's coming out moving forward, because as PowerSchool continues to develop on these products, we want to enhance our features that we have available to them and what you guys get out of these products. Performance Matters has now been under the PowerSchool umbrella for about 5 years, or 4.5 years, went by quick. And Schoology was acquired about 2.5 years ago. So again, very quick, but we want to continuously improve on these standards, especially as this becomes something that is being asked a lot more for in the day-to-day. Kelly, I know you're pulling up one other thing before I go into what's coming out next, and we're going to finish a little early for you guys too, so we'll be able to get some time. If you have any specific questions or want to learn more about any of this, PowerSource and PowerSchool Community are a great resource. If you guys do not have those logins as PowerSchool SIS users, you should. So please talk to your admin if you don't have them. There's some great articles in there on getting those standards set up in PowerSchool SIS. How do I start with that? That's all free. That's included in your subscription. If there's more support that you need, or if you're not seeing it in the PowerSchool community or PowerSource, please reach out to your reps, either Tasha, myself, Ryan, or Kat, and we'll be able to get you everything that you need on that.
Okay.
Kelly, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, you gave me just enough time. Thank you.
Perfect.
And hi, Caroline. Nice to see you. I got to meet Caroline at FETC this year. So glad to see you here. So I just wanted to we just, went through kind of a deep dive into what, I guess it was maybe not as deep of a dive as like, as much as it was an overview of what's currently possible. But I think it's important also for you to know where PowerSchool is really going when we think about standards and the way we treat and align standards in the system. So we're working on a pretty major project that we're calling Learning Standards Management. You might hear us call it LSM for short. And what that is, it's basically a way to have a singular library for all of those prioritized standards that you want to align to across different systems. So why is that important? Well, first of all, right now, you can track these standards in our different platforms. So, we have our unified classroom where we have PowerTeacher Pro, and we also have Schoology. And right now, those two things can talk together in terms of getting those standards. But if you have another system like a Performance Matters, for example, well, right now that isn't exactly aligned. So it's like they're different coding. So you're kind of looking at similar information, but they're not unified into kind of one area. So I'm going to bring up my slide real quick that has this on it. So basically what the LSM project is about is taking a look at basically our different systems that rely on standards. And we're working with an organization, some of you may have heard of it, that's called IMS Global. They're rebranding themselves, but they have a project that's called CASE. And what CASE is about is unifying the way systems transfer information back and forth, specifically around standards. So what you'll find if you do some investigation around what the CASE project is that at the states in the US here, they are actually reformatting their state standards to be in CASE format. And what that means for us is easy upload. So we already have all the standards we want. We can just put those right into a repository like LSM for Learning Standards Management, so that a lot of that work kind of gets done for us to have those in that library. Now, once we have those CASE aligned and CASE formatted standards in place in that central repository, what that means is we all have a true north of where we're aligning. So if I'm in PowerTeacher Pro, I'm grabbing standards from LSM. If I'm in Schoology, I'm grabbing standards from LSM. And if I'm in Performance Matters, grabbing standards from LSM. And that's important because all those things together give us a greater understanding of student progress against those identified scales and against those prioritized standards. So one thing that this allows us to do then also is to think about how we also integrate with other things like publisher content, because a lot of our publishers and those that they also have standards aligned content too, right? So they're also working with CASE. It's a gigantic kind of movement in the ed tech space. So ideally, in the same way that we kind of transfer information from system to system now for things like traditional grades like points, we're now going to take that to the next level and make that really unified experience inside of PowerSchool. So you'll be seeing information about this. If you've watched one of our roadmap webinars over the last several months, you've probably seen reference to this, and you'll continue to hear about that. And in addition to LSM, of course, we are working on specifically some ways that Schoology and PowerTeacher Pro speak to each other in terms of having similar calculation methods and a way for students to really get a good dashboard to see their own progress. And then for Performance Matters, those standards will then ultimately land inside of the Schoology mastery area, because that's really the kind of the best visual representation we have, both for students and really for staff, on how students are doing to make those pivots and to make those adjustments for student learning. So Lucas, anything else you want to add there?
No, not necessarily. I did want to quickly share, we will share a slide deck too with you guys. Thomas asked me, but I wanted to share quickly the feedback. Is my screen shown, Kelly?
Yep, got it.
So just wanted to, so you guys can quickly see us. It looks like a lot of people are in similar situations with standards, so that's exciting. You're not alone on this. A lot of schools are changing, but I thought this was very helpful information, so I appreciate you guys sharing that with us. One other caveat that I wanted to highlight: a lot of the stuff that Zach highlighted today between Schoology and Performance Matters with PowerSchool SIS does require you to be on PowerSchool SIS version 21.4 and newer. So if you're like, hey, I've never seen that before, or this is new to me, make sure you're on the newest version. If you are hosted, we will set that up for you. A lot of times you just have to approve it. We don't want to change stuff overnight without your approval. If you're not hosted, please reach out to your account rep to get information on how you can update. Again, if you've been updated within the last year, you should be good to go, but every once in a while, schools are a little bit older versions. So one thing I like to mention, but I think that's it. So again, we'll give back about 15 minutes or 10 minutes back in your guys' day. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit down with us and do this quick overview and introduction into standards and what PowerSchool has to offer. Your account rep will follow up with the recording and the slide deck, so you have that, as well as any questions. And then for any of you that I talked to on the chat that had specific questions, I will make sure your account rep follows up with those as well. So thank you again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great week. And we'll hopefully talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.